Chapter 8. Bob Beecham. The bar was full that night, warm, loose, full of easy laughter. Eddie made Tom a plate of shepherd's pie that tasted like it had been cooked with affection instead of ingredients. Even Finn was in a good mood, which meant he only cursed every third word. The bar was 20 minutes from closing when the door opened and Bob Beecham stepped inside. The shift was immediate, small, almost imperceptible, but real. Conversations thinned for half a breath, like the room was adjusting itself. Mara straightened. Declan lifted a hand in greeting. Even Finn paused mid-sentence, eyebrows lifting before he muttered, "Fuckin' Bob," with a grin that carried more affection than profanity. A couple of the regulars exchanged a quick glance, the kind people share when someone they know walks in, someone who carries stories the way other men carry tools. The fire popped sharply in the hearth, a single loud crack that made Old Man Carver look toward the doorway as if he'd been expecting it. Bob stepped fully inside, and the warmth followed him in, soft and familiar, like a lamp being turned on. "Look what the river dragged back," Finn said. Bob laughed, moving through the bar with the ease of someone returning to a place that remembered him. He nodded to the regulars, offered condolences before anyone could offer them to him, and took his usual stool like the seat had been waiting. "Sorry about your aunt," Maggie Doyle said. "Welcome home," Old Man Carver added. He looked at Tom with a quiet, knowing smile. "How's the new guy?" he asked. "I've heard good things. You're still here. They haven't scared you off. Good man." He said it like he already knew the answer. And for a moment, just a moment, the bar felt like it was listening. Bob took the stool across from Tom. He stayed until closing, talking with the staff, catching up with the regulars. When the last chairs were stacked, he finished his whiskey and glanced toward the dark hallway. "Still got your visitor, I see," he murmured. "You know about him?" Bob smiled, warm, familiar, unsettling. "Oh, he's been here longer than any of us. Some ghosts don't haunt places, you know." He stood, pulling on his coat. They haunt people. A few weeks passed, and by then Tom had seen Bob enough to know he wasn't just another regular. He drifted in and out of the bar like someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. He always talked to Tom like they were picking up a conversation they had days ago. One slow night, Tom was closing alone. Only 2 customers remained: Ray, a construction worker with strong opinions and a gentle delivery, and his buddy Kevin, who mostly nodded like punctuation. They were laughing about something when the door opened and Bob stepped inside. "Evening, gentlemen," he said. Ray grinned. "Thought you were off doing professor things." "Retired from that," Bob said. "Now I'm just a man with too much time and not enough sense." He took his usual stool. Tom poured his usual drink. "How's the night treating you?" he asked. "Slow," Tom said, "but good company." They talked about books, the river, the way the fog settled differently every fall. Bob listened the way he always did, fully, attentively, like he was storing every word. When Ray and Tom left, the bar fell quiet. Bob finished his whiskey, set the glass down gently, and looked toward the dark hallway. "You ever notice," he said softly, "how some places feel like they're watching you back?" Tom swallowed. "I've noticed a few things," Tom said. Bob nodded, as if he'd been waiting for that answer. "Good, means you're paying attention," he said. Chapter 9. Red Fox before Jewel Town had a name. Before the river was bridged or the mills were raised, the land along Red Fox Road belonged to Elias Turner, a plantation owner whose wealth was built on the backs of the people he purchased and worked until their bodies failed. In the spring of 1780, Turner stood at the docks, boots wet with brine, watching a line of chained men and women being unloaded from a coastal schooner. He selected one, a young man with steady eyes, and a quiet, exhausted dignity. Turner paid in coin and rum, signed his name with a flourish, and led the man away as if acquiring a new tool. When Turner returned to his property, he found chaos in the yard. One of his enslaved men had been caught stealing fruit from the kitchen stores, apples, peaches, whatever he could hold in his shaking hands. Hunger had driven him to it. Desperation had made him careless. Turner ordered the punishment immediately. The enslaved man was tied to the post while his wife and child were forced to watch. The new arrival, still unnamed, still trying to understand the rules of this place, stood nearby, helpless. The whip cracked again and again, each strike tearing flesh, each cry swallowed by the indifferent wind rolling off the river. The man survived the day, but not the infection. By the end of the week, he was dead. He was buried without ceremony behind the barn, in soil that had already taken too many. The plantation house that once stood on the hill burned a century later, but the land remembered. The river remembered. And the dead remembered most of all. The Davies house still stands on Red Fox Road, a stately colonial built in 1780 by craftsmen who took pride in every joint and beam. Its Federalist facade, the columns, the fireplace, the symmetrical windows, projects a kind of solidity the land beneath through age has earned. A historic society placard hangs beside the front door, though it says nothing about the plantation, the graves, or the people whose labor built the wealth that built the house. The original plantation house on the hill burned down more than 100 years ago, but the white fences remain. The slate-roofed barn still stands, its mortise and tenon rafters holding strong. One of the slave quarters survived long enough to be converted into a tool shed. The fields are well mown, the grass clipped short and neat. Dave Davies, a retired Westinghouse executive who inherited the property, kept everything immaculate. Generations of his family have lived here, each one further removed from the truth of how the land was first shaped. The haunting began quietly. Dave had placed fruit on the kitchen counter, fresh apples from the market. When he returned minutes later, one was missing. He searched the kitchen 3 times, baffled. Charlene teased him about forgetfulness, but he knew what he'd seen. A few nights later, they sat together in the living room, fire crackling, Netflix humming on the oversized TV Dave had proudly bought on sale at Walmart. The room was warm, until a coldness bloomed in the center of the room, sharp and unnatural. Dave reached out and felt the boundary of it, as if touching the edge of something solid and unseen. The fire did nothing to soften it. The next incident came quickly. Charlene was in the shower when Dave heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate. He stepped into the hallway just as a dark figure appeared at the top of the stairs, more shadow than man, surrounded by a haze that looked like smoke or vapor. It dissolved as he stared at it, evaporating into nothing. Before he could process what he'd seen, a loud bang echoed from the kitchen. He rushed in. Every cabinet door hung open. And on the table lay an apple, brown, rotted, collapsing in on itself, the stolen fruit. The past reaching forward, Dave and Charlene stayed up for hours, trying to make sense of it. But the shadow returned again and again, each time stronger, each time colder, each time more certain of its place in the house. Dave Davies always joked that the river liked him. He fished off the old dock behind the mill nearly every evening, claiming he'd seen that shadow thing more times than he could count. The first time he saw it outside, it stood at the far end of the dock. The second time, it was closer. The third time, it stood in the middle of the river path, watching him. 2 nights before he died, he whispered to Mara, "It's getting bolder." She told him to get some rest. He didn't. On the night he died, the fog was thick enough to swallow sound. Dave stood at the edge of the dock, humming to himself, when he saw the shadow again, this time right behind him. He turned, startled, slipped on the damp wood, and fell sideways. His ribs struck the edge of a small rowboat. The impact knocked the breath from him, and he slid silently into the cold water. The fog swallowed the splash. The police called it an accident, but the officers looked uneasy. Dave wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last.